it. So we've talked a little bit about making speakers comfortable. What other advice do you have around ensuring your speakers have the best experience or comfortable presenting on your webinars?
Certainly. I'll take this first, Steph. I think whether it's a pre-recording or it's live, one thing that I would recommend is starting, of course, with making the ask to the speakers. For me, being at an enterprise organization at Uber, we're 30,000 employees globally. Many of us have a lot to do. There's also odds are that not all of us know each other. So how do you get people to basically carve out time to be a speaker at your webinar? What I do is I actually have a template I use that I created to how to make the webinar speaking ask as clear and concise as possible. In your Docs tab over in Goldcast, I actually offered it as a Word document. You guys are welcome to download it and use it for your webinar speaking requests if that's at all helpful. The idea with how I crafted the message is you want to anticipate any and all questions that you would get in this initial message. This also helps instill confidence that the speaker that you're making the ask of, they feel confident in you, that you're going to carry them through this webinar process or virtual event process and help them look as best as they deserve to be. Steph, anything to add?
Yeah, I will just encourage everybody to download that template because I can attest, I use it after I saw it from Ariana. I was like, this is perfect. Because I think you want to take away as much murkiness in the process as you can. So I feel like sometimes my middle name is over communicating. So webinars can be really daunting for speakers, like I mentioned, and not everybody feels comfortable doing them or public speaking, or maybe just aren't used to it yet, because I think that speaking on webinars is kind of a muscle that you have to strengthen over time. So the more you communicate with speakers, the more information you give them up front, and the more lead time you give them to, one, ask questions, and two, review the content, get comfortable with what the ask is, the better. And while Iron Horse and Uber for Business, we partner on a lot of the content and the outline for the session and the deck and all of the copy. While we're working through all those things, we also share those assets with the speakers, not in their final form, just in their work in progress form. So they feel like they're brought along with the process. We encourage them to add notes, add color, really make the copy their own. So when they go into the session, it can feel super natural and they feel like they had a stake in the game going into it.
Yeah. And again, being whatever size organization you're at, but particularly as you get to larger organizations, think over 1,000 employees or even bigger, helping people feel involved and brought along on the process, like Stephanie does by sharing with our speakers, here's what the deck is going to look like, here's what the outline is going to look at, etc., helps them feel involved in the process. And then we all get to celebrate the wins when the webinar performs successfully. So definitely couldn't agree more on over communication.
Yeah, and I think something that's also really, really important with their speakers, and it's something that we didn't always do at the beginning, but once we started doing it, we have never looked back, is having a dry run with the speakers. So that's about a week prior to the session, and we usually do it a day or two before the pre-record just so it's fresh. But it's basically running the session from start to finish as if we were to hit record, but we're not really hitting record. So it's helpful for both the speakers and for us on the admin side for seeing, okay, how is the session flowing? Is there anything we're missing? Are we running long? Are we running short? Sometimes it becomes a really collaborative process as well. I know a couple weeks ago we were doing this with Ariana and a speaker group, and there was one part of the session that just didn't really seem to be working. So we reworked that live during the dry run, updated the deck, updated the outline, and everybody felt much more comfortable going into the session. So it just takes stress off of all parties involved to kind of know what you're going into before you go into that recording. So it's super helpful.
Yeah. And the other piece too is, first of all, shout out to college professors that creating content for a 30-minute webinar, a 60-minute webinar, or in their case, a 60-minute lecture, it's a lot of work. And one thing that we have found in our dry runs, to what Stephanie was saying, is sometimes the net of how long our content takes is 20 minutes out of a 30-minute webinar. Then yes, that leaves more time for Q&A, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're delivering sufficient information within the 30 minutes that folks are committing to us. So dry runs certainly help us, like Stephanie said, with making sure that the content is flowing and also that we have sufficient content to meet the run time that we're asking folks to give us. The other piece I'd also add, so kind of shifting back to thinking about speaking and speakers and helping them feel comfortable, is after running dozens of webinars, you also start to pick up who's a good speaker and who's a natural and who's an expert. So after the webinar recording goes well and everyone's feeling that post-recording high or post-live webinar high, I feel like that's a great moment to ask speakers if they'd like to be part of webinars again. This allows you to create a bench of speakers. And so the benefit is that it's less requests to people that may not know you. And also, you can also start to build webinar content and ideas around that bench of speakers' expertise.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's so huge. And something that happened to us last webinar recording, Ariana, that I actually haven't brought up with you yet, but one of the speakers asked if you had any specific feedback for him after the session, like constructive feedback, because he wanted to get better at speaking. So I thought that was so cool and such a something good to keep in mind, because these speakers, a lot of these people do want to continue to speak at webinars and kind of showcase their expertise. So the speaker bench, speaker profiles are super important. We list what speakers are good at speaking about, what their subject matter expertise is, what past webinars they've spoken on, and we include links to them. So this becomes like something that you can look at. So say Ariana picks a topic for her webinar and she's thinking, who is going to be my speaker for this session? She doesn't have to pull out the org chart, go back to the drawing board to kind of look for who's going to be a good fit. She can pull up her speaker bench and profiles and say, Lindsay is great at content. Let's ask her to join our next webinar. So it's super helpful.
Yeah, and certainly, and I think the last thing is, I feel like we could talk about, making our speakers comfortable all day, but I think the last thing I'll say is giving kudos, I think, is quite critical. Again, when you're in larger organizations, recognition is so key for making people feel seen and appreciated. So after our webinars, what I like to do is I'll post in high visibility forums, whether that's Slack channel, your formal feedback tool, things like that. So that way our speakers have it as a point of reference for them going above and beyond their scope by helping marketing something that has great benefits for the business. And we also send them short blurbs on LinkedIn for them to post on LinkedIn, because we want them to get their personal brand out there. Like Stephanie was saying, that one speaker that was asking for more feedback so we could do more webinars in the future, that's great. His speaking at our next webinar is going to be his first foray into starting to build that personal brand, and giving them pre-written LinkedIn text and the URL to the registration page helps put them as a thought leader on their LinkedIn profiles, which is super nice.
Yeah, it's great because they really are volunteering their time and their busy schedules to help with this. So although we do try and make it as easy as possible for them by giving them all the tools, they are volunteering their time. And so we want to make it as mutually beneficial as possible.
Yeah, and I'll add a few things onto that too from some things that we've seen work. One thing, kind of going into that appreciation and building your profile and getting yourself out there. One thing I always offer to speakers is if you're a Goldcast customer, you have Content Lab embedded within Goldcast. I always offer my speakers, there's a specific clip that you love or like a talk track that you want a clip of from that event, let me know and I can get you that clip for you. So that has worked really well too, I think, as an appreciation token to speakers, especially some people I feel like are very specific on what they want to share and what clips they want clipped out. So it's always nice to offer that up to people, and it's so easy. I can do it in like a minute, so it's not a heavy lift at all. And then another thing, like when you're talking about that speaker bench and creating that, one thing I always love to do too is once a webinar is done, asking, hey, do you have any referrals of people who might want to speak at a Goldcast event? Because you've already created like trust and authority with these people, and then they have people in their network who are friendly, so they're like, oh yeah, I'll recommend Sue to come speak with y'all. So great tips there. You're right, we could talk about how to make speakers comfortable all day, but we only have so much time.